Greetings, my excellent friend.
Welcome to Most Excellent Adventure to
Heavy Metal
History.
For whatever reason, man, this record, there's like nothing out there on it. So I was pretty stoked when you decided
and it's crazy because it's a pretty. I mean, I'm not tooting my own horn, but it's kind of there's actually a story behind it, believe it or not.
Awesome.
Well, kind of a weird twist, not twisted. I mean, nothing like weird, but like just a lot of events that happened before that album, was recorded, before we even wrote it. So there's a lot of real stuff that people don't know.
Okay, cool. So let's let everybody know real quick. Your name's David. You're the guitar player. You're pretty much like the sole remaining member from the original lineup left. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm Dave Gregor. I'm guitar and vocals, and I am the actual founder, and yes, the only original member left.
Cool. So this album seemingly came out in a weird time for heavy metal. I know a lot of people say metal started to die in like 1994, but the thing that I've been noticing, especially doing all the research and getting really just in depth with the albums that were released in this year, I don't see it. I think the quality is there. It's there. The albums are good. The bands are good. I'm really curious as to where this kind of started to come from, this whole metal died in 1994 thing. And
and that's the thing is we had three. I want to say three, but I at least the first two albums we had were very strong. Mm-hmm. And I will kind of, I guess, agree a little bit about what you're saying about the decline. Our third album, For All Eternity, that is on Peaceful as well, didn't do so well. It did not. And it really didn't get very much recognition at that point. Is there somebody trying to call me? Whoa. Oh, window. I'm sorry. Anyways, I was distracted for a second. That album didn't do very well for us. And now that you actually mention that, and I kind of reflected for a second, our fourth album didn't do so well either. I mean, the first two did very, very, very well, and they were very successful. And so I guess there's a point to that, because the third album would have been like 96?
Yeah,
96-ish, and then the fourth album would have been like 97, 98. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys had pretty consistent output, too, in the 90s, like putting something out almost every year, and that's pretty rare, I think, especially for death metal being pretty much at its height around that time, like late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing is we the way the band got signed was kind of odd, because we were doing our very first demo, and and I was like, I think 20, or I was like at least 20, if not 21. I think it was like 21, 22, and the rest of the guys were younger, much younger, in their teens, and we just got together. I had some previous band that was kind of like a SOD MOD type thing, and just wanted to be heavier, and kind of as the lineups progressed, the music progressed, and we did the demo, Glory Departure, and I think I sent it to like one guy over in Europe, and next thing you know, I'm getting orders from every country on the face of this earth. So wow. It was really cool, and next thing you know it, Johnny from Def Records is calling me like, hey, we want to sign you, and I'm like, wow, so it just the events, I always tell people, and I know it's a cliche where you say like, dude, that was a magic year, but the real early 90s were magic, just like Metallica, how they pretty much exploded and just took over the world, but They played everywhere. And it was at that era where like, I was selling our cassette tapes literally out of the trunk of my car, and like, I didn't work. I didn't have to. I was making money off of selling my tapes. So, I mean, just different times, and now I feel like it's you just don't see like the success stories, I guess, like you did back then.
Yeah, there's just an overabundance of music, and everything is so ready at everybody's fingertips because of the internet now, that it's just changed the whole face of how people are able to access everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also, too, though, there's like shifts. There's like shifts in, like, I noticed, when we went on our tour last year, the year before now. Anyways, we went on our tour and just doing the different things that we've been doing the different festivals and everything. I'm really starting to see there's just a lot of death metal that likes it very low guttural stuff. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a very popular trend right now. I'm not like that, so I'm really not in the popular category with a lot of the death that's out there today. And I don't know if that means that's cool for me because I stand out more. But I'm 52 years old, and it's like I can't get that low anymore. My vocals do change as they have changed as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
So but I just kind of noticed that as far as just in the style of music now, there's a lot of low guttural stuff, and the one thing that really irritates me with a lot of the bands now is people are just singing over everything from front to start, and that really bothers me because you really need to let music breathe. And when I hear a lot of vocals over stuff, I'm just kind of like, wow, man, what went through your mind thinking just to sing over everything? But that's my taste.
Mm-hmm.
I like to let the music breathe, like on Dying Remains is a perfect example of an album. It breathes. I don't sing over everything. And there's some songs I probably got 2 sentences maybe, and that's it, or 3 sentences and I'm done. And I just felt that's what the song called for. And we like to call it serving the song.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that and the less is more approach.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about you for a minute, man. Like coming up in the scene,
yeah.
What were some of those early bands and records that you remember first hearing that got you into heavy metal that made you want to do this and be a part of this scene?
Well, the first one for me was, I had our producer at the time was Eric Reif, and he this is kind of like a little bit before the band, but Eric had a form. He said, hey, you gotta want to do this. Well, this is some of the stuff you might want to check out. And I know the first album I checked out was Death Leprosy.
Nice.
And I was like, wow. I'm like, this is badass. I'm like, wow, I can hear everything the guy's saying. I can hear his voice. Like, I can hear it. I'm like, I love it. Solos were on, just everything. It was just a great album from start to finish. I feel it still stands the test of time today, and I still listen to it. And it sounds great. I actually think it sounds better than Individual Thought Patterns, like production-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like how many years before it? So you kind of like what you're saying, the older productions, yeah, there was a really lot of cool ones. But the reason that kind of got me into it, and then I started listening Obituary's first album, DSI. We kind of came on the scene when every band all these huge death metal bands like Cannibal Corpse and Deicide, Morbid Angel, Cancer, Obituary, you just name them, Suffocation. They were all their first albums were out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a magic thing about a band's first album, but all the first albums, and I'm not saying their later albums were bad. I'm just saying but just the first albums is what I got hooked on. The first Suffocation, the first Obituary, there was something, they all had their own style to bring, to the death metal genre. They were all different, but they were just all heavy in different ways. And at that time, I'm not like a shred solo guy,
Mm-hmm.
I just never have been. I'm kind of, the guys in my band say you're kind of eerie and you got a kind of a feel, and Eric Rutan, that guy is just a huge influence on me for, just one of my influences where I just his bends and his pitches, and that's kind of how I am. So I noticed that in some of the death metal bands, you really didn't have to be good at soloing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Maybe I can fit in with this because I'm a heavy rhythm player. I want to play fast. I want to play slow. I want to do it all. And at that point, because here at home in our scene, the hair metal thing was going on. Everybody in my home, not everybody, but a good portion of people in my town were hair metal guys. So they were, shredders and all these fancy, and I just didn't really fit in with any of those guys, I was kind of more like, dude, fucking tune the guitars down, fucking slow your turntable down. Let's fast forward that, let's do something different, something that's heavy. And all those first bands I mentioned, all their first albums, it really drew me in at that point. And especially Death, one of my major influences, they drew me in the most. And I think listening to Leprosy, it just really grew on us. And we as a band, just all of us, we were just, very young and very influential. And I really think that album just kind of took over in our brains a little bit. And we were just, a bunch of kids in the basement. We were like, hey man, let's just write whatever we think of, let's write it. And we'd write stuff and we'd be like, yeah, that's cool. Let's use it. We didn't really go into a whole lot of thought process like, oh, is the song structured correctly? Is this right? Is that right? We just went for it. And we were like, cool. And we got a couple songs together, and, that's kind of when everything started.
That's one of the things you mentioned, all those like early death metal albums. I think that's an excellent point that you make, that if you take them all and put them side by side, like as far as sound wise, they could not sound any different from each other, but they're also in the same genre. They like those albums did such a good job of solidifying like unique sounds within the genre. Nowadays obviously it's not like that anymore. You've heard it for like 20, 30 years now, but man, I can imagine being live when that was out. I was probably a little bit too young to hear it, but just hearing each one of those back to back to back and being like, oh, this is different than this is different than this, and just some little way where each little I guess area, so to speak, of the country just made it their own.
Oh, absolutely. Florida at the time, Florida was hot,
Yep.
But Immolation, they're from I think New York. So,
Mm-hmm.
Suffocation, New York. So, it wasn't all about Florida, but Florida, a lot of people feel Florida was the birthplace. And then it kind of exploded. Cause Morta Skuld, we're not a first gen death metal band. We're a second gen death metal band. I'm proud of that because, like I said, I had some awesome influences that came before me.
Yeah. I think you can hear some of those influences on pieces of this record that we're going to talk about, as well as the other ones. But you still do such an excellent job of taking those influences and making it your own. And I think that's more important than just like mimicking or, aping off of a certain style. But even then the genre was still so new. There was no way to like, I guess, copy a band at that point in time. You still were able to make something new, whereas nowadays it's a lot harder to make something sound new in a genre.
It really is. It is. It's a very big challenge, especially with kind of what you said before, where like music's at the touch of your fingers now.
Yep.
And so it's very, very unique. Even us as a seasoned band, we're in the middle of our next record, and there's a couple times where I'm like, man, should we lengthen this or what, just a certain part or whatever. And I'm like, oh no, the song's too short and this and that. And my guys are going, you know what? There are no rules. We can do whatever we want, so we're not going to second guess anything. We write, we make sure everybody's got their parts, and then we move forward, structure the rest of the song. And then we're like, okay, this is our song. And then of course, after that, I take the song and, put vocals and stuff. And then we always had the harmonies and the solos and, stuff like that to, finish it off. But, there's definitely some interesting stuff. Whenever you want to talk about that record, there's definitely some interesting stuff that I could tell you.
Yeah. So the one thing that I noticed kind of going into this, like I was saying, is it seems like most of the information or most of the records that everybody talks about is Dying Remains or the one that came after that one, For All Eternity. So when I was looking up stuff for this record, it was just like, oh, it got put out in 1994, and I was like, well, what else? Like,
and that's very strange, because As Humanity Fades, between Dying Remains and As Humanity Fades, those are two very popular albums. Yeah, that people, when we did our label Peaceville, they just repressed the first three. They just years ago, like 5 years ago, they repressed Dying Remains, and they still repress it when it's sold out. But the other two finally are all reissued. So the first three albums are available for reissue at Peaceville, and they actually just did a second pressing of As Humanity Fades.
Nice.
So I kind of don't. The third one, For All Eternity, we really did not sell very well on that record, and that one seemed. That would seem to be the year, like kind of what you had mentioned earlier in our conversation about how things started kind of going down, other music started coming in and taking over, and death metal, kind of went its way. And that's one of the reasons why we went away for a while. We couldn't find anybody that wanted to play death metal anymore. Everybody wanted to go with whatever the flavor of the week was, and they went that way. And we're kind of like, shit, we're out of luck. We're sitting here and we can't find guys to play. So, it was kind of one of the reasons to the demise of the band back in the day.
Yeah, it's got to be a hard thing, man. Like, that's one thing when I'm always like looking up information about all this stuff or talking to people, the thing that interests me most are the bands that kind of like flew under the radar. And I don't mean this as any offense to you guys, because I know you guys are up there in terms of the death metal genre. But I think a lot of stuff just kind of like gets lost to time a little bit, and people forget about bands, and then you have to like reignite that like flame again, so to speak, to be like, hey, check this band out. Remember them? Remember these records they put out?
Right.
They should have been a lot bigger.
And that's kind of what happened to us is in 2011, we kind of did a revival thing, and I had the original guys from the demo. Nice. And we kind of did that for like maybe a year, and I kind of was like, if we're going to do this, I'm like, why don't we start writing? And my drummer was like, I don't want to do any writing. And I'm like, really? And I was like, well, then let's learn some other songs, some Dying Remains songs or something. And he it wasn't in his, how can I say it? I don't know. He wasn't that good. I mean, he was a good player, but he just couldn't do the other stuff. And he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I was like, fine, whatever. But it led us into, had to change the lineup again. And then I was like, you know what? This lineup wants to write. So we started writing, and that's what led us to write the EP, the Serving Two Masters EP on Dread Records. And that's kind of what I did that for, because I said to my guys, let's do something and see if we can test the waters. Kind of like you said, you're gone for a while. And in the times we live in now, if you're gone for like 2 weeks, people are like, who?
Yep.
So it's a constant challenge to be in people's, in their face all the time. But that's why we did Serving Two Masters. We wanted to test the waters. My local buddy here put it on his distro, and it sold pretty well. It sold really well, and we got a lot of compliments off it, and was like, cool. And then at that point it was, okay, well, I know we need to really step it up a notch, and we need to do a full blown album. And then that'll be like kind of so to speak, a comeback, kind of is. And then, so, it was definitely, it was a good experience.
But I mean, it reignited that like passion to you a little bit. I assume,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't even want to do this really. Like I said, my old manager, Eric Reif, was like, hey, you going to do Morta Skuld again? I'm like, nah, man. Cause after Morta Skuld broke up in 98, 99, I went on a couple of years later to form, people say they call it new metal, but it's funny because if you listen to a lot of these people like, Korn and Disturbed, they'll say new metal has rap and turntables, which we never did. But we were kind of like a heavy Linkin Park, had some clean singing, dirty singing. And that band went on to do a couple albums and a tour, and it was pretty successful, and had some lineup issues. And okay, here we go. And I just like, what, I'm done. And Eric was like, hey man, let's get Morta Skuld, and he bugged me for probably about a good year. And then finally I was like, I'm not doing anything. I'll entertain it. And then going through playing playing all the demo stuff, I was like, okay, this is kind of cool, but I'm like, I'm at a different level in my playing than I was back then. And then I was kind of like, well, do I want to go for it? It was just a lot of different things. And then I don't know, somewhere along the line, the passion just kicked in again, and it just kicked in. And I was like, let's fucking do this,
That's awesome to hear, because I think that's important, like to not push yourself if you're not feeling it. You don't want to put out just a bunch of bad records under your band's name just because it's a thing to do. And if it's not there, it's not there. Like, don't force it.
Right. Exactly.
So let's go back about 25 years. You'd already had your first record out with Dying Remains. Yep. Where did the writing kind of start for As Humanity Fades, and where was the band at during this time period?
All right. Well, like you said, we did Dying Remains, did a lot of really cool things with that record as far as, shows and stuff. And, the band basically broke up after that. Okay. So that's something a lot of people don't know is the band broke up. I had a disagreement with the other three guys that were in the band at the time. They wanted to go, our guitar player, Jason, he wanted to go more like American kind of sounding style, and I wanted to keep it more European sounding. Mm-hmm. And we were butting heads. And I was like, you know what, guys, this is my band. And I said, I'm not, this isn't the vision of Morta Skuld. And they were like, well, we want to do this. And I was just like, well, it's, and it really wasn't so much my bass player. He pretty much, it really wasn't him. It was the drummer and the guitar player. They were, kind of like a Nazi, regime trying to, come at me and storm the wall, and I'm just like, hey man, I'm like, I don't want to go that route. And, Jason was very influenced by like Malevolent Creation at that point. And so he wanted to, and I'm just like, nah, man, I want to do more like Bolt Thrower and some Obituary. And, I'm just, saying like, that's kind of, area we were going in. Mm-hmm. And he just, no. So I was like, all right, dude. I said, well, I'm, and if you talk to them, they may say they kicked me out. I don't know. I feel like I left. Either way, we broke up. They went their way. I went my way. There was a local death metal band in town here, and their singer was gone, and they had a whole band, and they weren't doing anything either. And I was like, hey man, you guys want to like be my backing band, and do some Morta Skuld? And they were like, yeah. So I started playing with those guys, and they started learning the songs, and we actually played a couple gigs out. And then while I was doing that, my original 3 guys were writing at that point.
Oh wow.
And what happened was I got invited to a party. There's a local band here way back in the day called Realm Thrash Band, and they were having a party, and I got invited. And it was kind of like it was kind of like one of those things like where you dated somebody and you're not really seeing them anymore, but then you run into them at a party, and that's kind of what happened with us. The other 3 guys were at the party. I was at the party. And we just kind of started talking. They're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm playing out, and I got this band behind me. And they're like, oh, yeah. They're like, well, we're really having a hard time. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, we can't find somebody that can either sing really well or play really well or do both really well. And I was like, oh, so I'm, because I think even at that point, the guitar player was, basically said I play for shit and, and I sucked and all this other stuff because he was so much better, which he was a better guitar player. He was. But I didn't think I sucked, I still was keeping up, and we are still doing what, singing and playing. But yeah, I think he's like, you suck or whatever it was. And I was like, fine. So when we started having this conversation, I said, I guess I don't suck so much anymore, do I? Because you guys can't find anybody. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, there you go, So funny thing is my band that was backing me at that time, well, their singer had come back and he kind of wanted his band back. So they kind of left. And it was kind of like they were trying to find a guitar player singer. I was trying to find a band. And we just kind of, they're like, well, why don't you come over to the house? We practiced in Jason's mom's basement for years. Like, why don't you come over to the house and let's, we'll show you what we're doing. I'm like, okay. So I went over to the house and they played me the songs that they had written. Now they tuned up. I think we were at like drop C or drop C sharp or something like that for Dying Remains. Okay. And they tuned all the way up to D standard, which Death is tuned in D standard, just kind of a note. So they tuned up to D standard and they're writing these songs and I'm like, oh wow, these songs are very Malevolent Creation, just chunking, just a very similar, I can hear a lot of similarities. And that was because Jason, he was one of those guys where he'd listen to a record and it would kind of overpower him sometimes. And he would like start writing very similar style music. And we were like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but you got to be careful, dude, because you can't write a Malevolent Creation album. They're their band, So, they had something like, I don't know, I think eight songs or something like that. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I really don't know about the tune-up thing. And they're like, oh, come on, and the songs are real tight, And I says, well, I kind of like that song, and I like this one and that one, and those other ones I really don't care for. And they're like, okay. And I was like, so let's keep these 5, and then let's write like another 5 or whatever it was. I think 5 or 6. I can't remember how many tracks are on there. And then we'll write another 5. So basically, there's like half of that album was written by the 3 of them without me. I mean, I still did my vocals and solos were still done by me and written by me. And then we did another, like I said, 5 or 6 tracks as a band. Mm-hmm. So those songs were more written by us, all together then. And then basically that's kind of what led us to, and actually now that I remember, even before we even released the album and before we finished it, we went in and actually did a demo, and we did, I think, like 5 songs. And then we were like, let's see what people think of the 5 songs. And then I believe we went back in and we finished, we added like another 7 tracks or whatever it was. So there was like a demo floating around, and I get it every now and again where some people send me a picture like, check it out. And it was funny because I ran into Chuck from Death. I think it was in Chicago when they played many years ago. And this was, like right before, I think, As Humanity Fades. And he came up to me, and I just briefly met him. It was the first and last encounter. And he, I was like, dude, hey, what's up? And, hey, how you doing? And then that was it. And our manager, Eric, at the time was like, hey, dude, you guys want to, like, this demo of Human from Death? And we're like, hell yeah. And I remember he gave us, it was like a test pressing, and it had a blue J card with just like, black print.
Yeah.
So when we did our As Humanity Fades demo, we did the same thing. We did like a blue J card with the black print. And I was trying to give him our demo, like, hey, dude, you inspired me to do it the same way. Here you go, But then, yeah, once we wrapped up all the songs, we went in, recorded it as an album, and then released it. So, yeah, it was a very weird transition for me because I went from a drop tuning to a standard tuning. And so there were a lot of challenges for me on that record musically because it was just different. You've been playing for so many years in this way, and then now you're playing this way. And their songs were very, very, like, way more precision. So it was a little bit, it was definitely the musicianship stepped up on that record. And like I said, there were a few challenging parts going in and doing the album, but I do remember once we did start recording and we got through the process that it was a fun process, though. We did have fun with it.
Well, I think it's good that you were cognizant of the fact that you weren't trying to imitate other bands. You were talking about sounding too much like Malevolent Creation. I think a lot of people nowadays wouldn't even think about that. They'd be like, oh, so what? We sound like, Malevolent Creation. It'll be like a throwback.
Yeah,
sound.
well, I still do it. I still do it. I'm like, hey man, like I'll write a riff and then my drummer Eric will be like, yeah, that kind of sounds to him. Like, really? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh man, I don't think so. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, if we blatantly, if one of us writes something and it really, really reminds somebody, we're like, yeah. Because I know there's a song off the new record that that we've written right now that's not recorded yet, but my guitar player Scott's like comes with this, yeah, I don't know if you're gonna like this riff, and then dun 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 dun. I'm like, dude, that kind of sounds like Death a little bit. And he's like, really, dude? Mm-hmm. And like nobody else thinks it sounds like Death but me. And I was like, yeah, it kind of does. I said, I can't remember what song, but I said I can hear it, just slightly. So yeah, there's always gonna be little, and I know I always get they always give me grief because they're like, a lot of my riffs are a little Morbid Angel sounding a little bit, I guess, in some of the speed sections. And I'm like, I guess. I'm like, I don't know. I said, I'm not trying to emulate anybody. It's just kind of what kind of comes out. So yeah, I think a lot of times too, in all of us old schoolers, that we've had so many years of listening to this style of music and so many years of listening to our influences and the bands that we love, that I think sometimes it's just natural that it kind of comes out that way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even then, having to deal with kind of readjusting to like losing members and then getting back with the same members, but they're writing stuff you're not like super thrilled about, and coming up with a compromise in there in the middle too. Like, you're dealing with all these situations trying to make the best end product you can in the long run.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Members, yeah, member lineup changes, they can change the dynamics. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely they can.
It's funny too, you mentioned the tuning change, and even though it's like tuned up from what you normally would play in or recorded in the past, this record still sounds ridiculously heavy. I mean, there's no shortage of that on it at all.
Yeah, well, we did a little bit different, on that one. I do know, I think we added some mids in our playing, because back then scooping your mids was like the thing everybody did. It was just the way you played. And I think we kind of put a little bit more mids in our sound, and we were just looking for that crunch. We were looking for that heavy crunch, and I think we achieved a pretty good record. I mean, we were in the studio for quite a few weeks, and it just was a really good sounding record. And also the guy who the guy who recorded, the first 4 records for us was the same guy. Okay. And in various studios, but the first 2 records were recorded in the same studio. And I really think that that's why those 2 records sound so good, is just because that studio had something about it.
So let's get into that aspect of it. So
yeah.
By the time you had finished writing all the songs, was everything like ready to go? Like by the time you were in the studio, or were you still like tweaking stuff a little bit, like doing like pre-pro or anything like that? Or was it just written and straight into the studio?
No, I believe we wrote it. I think like I said, we wrote and then we demoed. We demoed a couple songs, and then we went in and we finished. But the one thing that I always had to do with those guys, because they wrote really fast, and it was always hard for me. It was always a challenge for me to keep up, because they're like, oh well, we're done, and I'm like, well, I still have to write, vocals and then figure the deliveries out, and I got to write solos. Yeah. So I have a little bit more to do than some of those guys. I'm like, hey man, but they were always writing so fast. So actually, with that album, I think there were 2 songs that I had lyrics written for, but I don't think I sang to it or nothing. It was just one of those things where I'm like, okay, I got the lyrics, I'll just have to do it in the studio. So that is probably the only thing we really had to tweak. I do know that I worked with Jeff Hamilton on, he was like our co-producer, and he oversaw and worked on a lot of my solo sections. Mm-hmm. Because I just, again, I'm not one of those Joe Shred guys. And so my mentality is a little bit different. I always tell people, if shredders think with the right side, I think with my left side. I think everything comes from a guitar singer standpoint for me. And, I don't know. I just never kind of gravitated into that type of player. But, at the same point, there's pros and cons to it too, Yeah. But, like I said, yeah, they would be like, oh, we're finished. And I'm like, well, I still got more stuff to do. So a lot of times it was a race. I'm like, oh crap, I gotta get on. I gotta get on this. And I think it was like that for probably the first 2 or 3 records. Maybe not so much Dying Remains. At Dying Remains, I felt like we had it done, we had it down, and we just went in and just kicked it and got it out. But the other 2, I remember having problems with as far as like the vocals. There were a couple songs that were still unfinished vocally because I don't know if it was a deadline we had at the point to do or whatever, if it was just the band wanted to hurry up. Kind of getting back to, like you said, wow, because we did 4 albums in 8 years. Yeah. And I kind of feel like we, as a unit, we just had this work ethic, like hurry up, let's keep going. And sometimes I feel like, in hindsight, I feel like, oh, I wish we would have kind of slowed down, or I wish in this area, or maybe we should have taken our time with this album, because even the 3rd album, For All Eternity, I always felt like the mix was garbage on that record. I mean, I remastered it and we reissued it and it sounds better, but it's just something about that mix. I don't, and there actually is one song, the title track, For All Eternity, is actually taken from the As Humanity Fades sessions.
Oh, really? So it was just something that was left over?
That song was, it was a song, honestly, at the time, I was like, I don't want to do that song. And they're like, okay. And then when we were writing For All Eternity, I'm like, dude, I think I got a title, and I think that would be a good song to do. And they're like, okay. Huh. So that is a song taken from the prior session.
I mean, I guess that's a good thing about always writing and putting out records that quick, is you're never really short on material, because even if you have something left over like that, I mean, it's still viable. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but it is. I find myself sometimes going like, now that I'm in my 50s, I'm like, oh really? Oh God, we gotta write a record. That's like my first initial, because for people that don't know, it's a process. Yeah. And it's a long process. It's unless your band isn't playing out, or either your band isn't playing out and you're practicing 4 or 5 days a week, you know what I mean? Yeah, you could probably whip a record out in a couple months. But all of us work, and family and jobs, and you know what I mean, and we're pretty active playing out and stuff. So we wanted to finish the record, the newest, the one that's for 2020.
we wanted to finish it by last year because we started writing right after Wounds Deeper Than Time came out. We were like, we're not. I said, hey, let's get a jump on this. So we wrote like 3 or 4 songs in 2017, and then we wrote like I think three in 2018, and then we just wrote one this year already. So it's a timely process, and I think sometimes in my mind I want to get it done. You know, I want to do this. I want to get this done, but then other things kind of come into play, like your life, weather, driving back and forth to practice, and if weather's crappy, can't practice today. You know, there's one lost. You know. So, but I'm very passionate about what I do, and it's just one of those things now where it's like now that I got over the initial album, now I'm like, okay, let's do this. We're in album mode now, and it's just trying to find that balance, trying to find the balance between your life, playing out live, traveling for gigs. Yep. You just have to find that balance. You have to know where to fit it in, and that's kind of what we do. We try to juggle, I think our December 15th or something like that was one of our last gigs. And we were like, okay, from December to whatever, let's see if we can pump out a song or two, And sometimes, like you said, the forcing thing, we don't like to force things. Mm-hmm. And the only time we'll write is if, somebody has an idea. And I know like Scott and I, we catalog our riffs. Like I'll be sitting at home and I'll be practicing, and all of a sudden I'll get this idea and I record it and I throw it in the bank. And then a lot of times I'll be stuck on something. I'll be like, I really, really want to show this to the band. And then I'll show it to the band and be like, dude, that's awesome. Let's start with this, So him and I both have a ton of riffs banked up whenever we come up with them. And then sometimes we come up with them that week or the week after, so sometimes they're real new. Sometimes they could be old, but we just kind of bank them all up. And then that way we have ideas to shoot around.
And see, that's a nice thing that you probably didn't have back when you were first starting out the band. You didn't have a way to like save all these riffs that you were probably sitting on or thinking of in your head, short of like writing it down. But even then, how far is that going to get you to remember?
Yeah, back then it was more like we still do it similar, except for, of course, with technology, it's a little different. I mean, now we do file sharing, and I'm not talking about anything fancy or nothing, because most of us aren't very technical, savvy. But I'll record something on my phone, and then I'll email it to the guys, or Scott, a lot of times he'll record something and like text me a riff, and then when we go to practice, a lot of times we're coming up with stuff. If we want to start a song, we'll have a writing session, and then at the end of that writing session, we'll be like, well, let's record what we have or where we have the song up to. And then we'll record that portion, and then Eric will email it to all of us so we have it, so we can practice it at home or try to get different ideas. And then once everybody has it, then we build, we'll be, hey, I got a riff to go with that riff, and then after this, I think we could go into this. And, but back in the day, no, it was pretty much very, very primitive. It was, hey, show me that riff. Okay, well, I'll show you this riff. Okay, and then at best, you had a boombox.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And it's funny we're mentioning this because my buddy in Dread Records, my local guy here, he's very popular for doing tape cassettes. Very popular for that. And he's like, come on. He's like, hey man, I know you got some of those basement recordings. He's like, I'd really like to put that on a cassette. And I go, really? I go, why on earth would anybody want to hear basement? But there's fans all over the place, especially overseas, that love that, And it's all these outtakes. Like, I mean, I'm talking about stupid stuff, and then we're jamming, and then we're, so all these different things. And that's what he's probably, I guess later on this year, he's going to release that, where it's just it's different versions of songs. I think there's like 2 Dying Remains songs, and then a song we did for Earache that were kind of in its inner workings at that point, and we were just like rehearsing them, and we just recorded them. So, but that's how we would record back in the day. It's just a boombox. And then, but otherwise, yeah, you didn't have any, hey, I'll send you this or I'll send you that, or, so yeah, it was definitely more primitive, and you had to actually, I feel back then you had to be more in the same room with the people at the same time in order to complete the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's helped a lot of bands nowadays too, having that technology to be able, to be like across the country or across a county,
Oh yeah.
It's nice. I think it's. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I think it's an interesting like aspect because like on one hand it is making music thrive more, but it's also flooding it more. It's like a double-edged sword there.
It really is. I mean, I know a couple guys in town here. They're in bands that are like based in just all over, and I'm like, how do you guys practice? Oh, we Skype or we do this, and I'm like, what? But for me, I've told my guys from day one, the first and foremost thing is we are a live band. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have a bunch of seasoned players in my band, so everybody's pretty good about keeping up on their chops or whatever they got to do. But in the end of the day, yeah, we're a live band, and I love to rehearse. Like I'm like, hey, let's and unfortunately, there's some times where we can't rehearse as much for a couple of months here, a couple of months there, and it kind of drives me nuts a little bit because I am one of those guys where I like to get together with my guys.
Yeah. So
it's just so tighter. It's just you feel the tightness.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're not playing, you're not thriving, I think. Especially if you're like really into the music, you're kind of depriving yourself of that like artistic output.
Sure. I mean, I'm not saying they're not tight or we're not tight. There's times where we'll practice one day a week, and it's like, oh, hey, we're not, everything sounds great. But typically before gigs, we'll rehearse more and just trying to get that feel back and get that tightness, and then okay, all right, let's do some gigs.
I mean, I think that's more than most bands do. I mean, I'm not saying every band, but I've witnessed very recently this rash of bands playing to backing tracks, and it drives me insane.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Live bands playing to backing tracks. They're not even playing their instruments on stage, and I'm just like, this is.
Are you kidding me?
No, I promise.
That's messed up. I'm not. And that's one thing too. I'm like very, how can I say this? I'm not a perfectionist. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not a perfectionist, but I'm not like a half-asser either.
Yeah.
But like a lot of times, like we'll play and I'll be like, oh man, I totally made a mistake here. Or, I used to be very, very, very hard on myself. And especially back in the early days, oh God, our goal is to play as if you were listening to the record. That was our goal.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a bad goal, but lately the older I get, and I know with the lineup I have, it's kind of like, what are you going to do? You're live. You're human. And that's like with the last album we did, and even the next record, I always tell the guys, when we go in the studio, as far as the engineer, I'll be like, I don't want it to sound like crap, but if there's a little piece here and there that isn't maybe the cleanest, I don't care, because I don't want people to listen to my record and go, there's no way they're playing their instruments, because we are, and we always have. And so I want to make sure that our stuff still sounds like people are playing them, because I've listened to some death metal where I'm like, there's no effing way that these guys are playing this on guitar. There's no way.
Yeah.
And maybe they are, but it doesn't sound real to me. And that's the one thing I've always liked to really keep in the sound of Morta Skuld is keep the real feel and also the live feel.
Yeah, I mean that's like my favorite thing about hearing and seeing a band, man, is like listening, to those like string slides when your fingers are just moving across the strings, getting those chunky riffs in there. Like that is that is great to me, but I don't want to sit here and watch a guy play to a recording of something he did in the studio. Even if he did do it, in the studio, I'd rather him do it live. But yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah,
I've
there's
noticed.
a lot of, and it's funny because a lot of people don't realize, and this goes through a lot of different genres, but a lot of people don't realize that a lot of your bigger bands play with backing tracks.
Yep.
A lot of them. Matter of fact, there's even, I can't remember his name, the guy in, is it Warrant, I think, or whatever? I hope I got the right band, but he used to be the harmonizer to Ozzy for years.
Oh, wow.
And nobody knew that. Yeah, they had him in a little tent. And that's some of these huge bands a lot of times, like Disturbed, because they have some guest guys too, and I know they play the backing tracks too. But you don't see these people, but they're actually playing, but they're off stage.
Yeah.
So a lot of bands do that, and like you would never know it. But to me, my whole thing is, this is just my philosophy, is I would not want to make something so studio to the point where you play out and you can't deliver.
Yeah.
I'd rather be the opposite. I would rather have my album not sound as good as I do live, I guess, if I had that choice. So that way when we play live, people are like, oh, wow, dude, you sound better than the record, A
little bit of a trade-off there.
Yeah. No, I mean, that it, what, in the end of the day, like I told you, we're a live band, and that's where we're, I know there's some bands in town are focusing on like, hey, Spotify and oh man, and this and that. And I even had some guy come up to me. We did a show with Skeletal Remains here close to town, and the guy, one of the guys, takes me across. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, you gotta get your Spotify numbers up there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You only have like whatever 1,000 followers. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm like, Spotify is Spotify. If people want to check it out, they can. If they don't. And I just think we have those types of fans that would rather come and see us live and buy a CD than, go on Spotify. I mean,
which is good.
And it is. And it's just, but I just find it funny that some bands really focus on that arena, where they're just like, hey, I got to have, cause I remember I was just filling out some submission or something like that. I think a couple months ago for our band, and they were asking for like, what's your Twitter account? What's this, what's that? And I'm like, don't have. We don't even have our own YouTube channel. And I'm like, I don't know, dude, people like film us and they like put it up, and I'm like, cool. And then I just share it with other people. And that's kind of how that's how I do our stuff. But the Twitter thing, I think, is a dead format, and Instagram, please. I mean, we've got our Reverb Nation page. We've got our Facebook page. We're available though on Spotify and iTunes and Amazon. And I mean, Christ, you can go to Target and order our album, or Walmart. Wow. Yeah, one of my buddies did that. He's like, dude, I just got your album at Target. I'm like, cool. I mean, he had to order it, but, I'm like, oh, cool, So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, but I would rather just focus on the fans, man. I mean, I think that's more organic.
What's funny, though, is As Humanity Fades is not on Spotify.
What is?
As Humanity Fades is not on there.
No, I'm sorry. The new record is. Sorry, the new record. And probably Dying Remains.
It honestly, no, it was pretty much everything in your discography except for that record. Because when I was like double checking some stuff for like crazy numbers, I was like, wait, what? Where's this record? It just goes from Dying.
And that's crazy because that was such a good year. I mean, we played. Oh man, we were opening that year. We opened for like, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I know over those few years, it was like, we opened for Obituary, and I'm trying to think here, Malevolent a bunch of times, and Suffocation, and we played with Death at the Milwaukee Death Fest, and just all kinds of. We played with so many of these awesome bands that were like our influences during that period.
Man.
And I think some of those bands were just like, hey man, that As Humanity Fades is killer, and so I mean I know Phil from Malevolent. I think he always used to talk about it. So. And he helped us with The Surface. I know he liked that track too. He helped us get signed at that time to Pavement Records, which was really cool of him.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's always good when you have support from your peers in the genre. That's one thing that can be a little bit rare, especially these days.
And I think in our day and times now, and maybe it's just me, but I do find that some circles in our community a little harder than others, and I think the reason, and I don't want to sound mean about it, but I do think there's some bands that are like, hey, we'll help. Some bands are like, no, it's tough out there. That's basically what I'm trying to say. It's tough out there, and everybody's kind of fighting. I mean, I don't mean this like a lot of us on the smaller level, fighting for the same fans. You know what I'm saying? It's not what it once used to be, but it's still doing well. I mean, a lot of the death metal tours are doing very, very well, and a lot of bands, especially what I find out now is what's happening is a lot of bands are being inspired again. You had that lull for maybe 5-10 years or whatever, where bands they weren't inspired because the music shifted. Music shifted and it went over to grunge, and then it shifted over this and shifted that. And it's like, well, where's death metal? And I think within the last like 5 or 6 years, maybe even 5 years, I think a lot of bands, like the last Suffocation, freaking amazing. The last two Obituaries, amazing.
Yeah.
Not saying the other records were bad, just saying at least that was my vibe too, and it happened to me too on our records. I feel like you could just kind of feel like, everybody had that inspiration, and then the industry just went a different way for a little while, and I think that I really think that kind of hurt all of us, even the bigger bands. I think it hurt.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, Immolation's last album too. I mean, all of a sudden everybody just started writing these amazing albums. Like I said, not saying their other ones aren't, but I just feel like everybody kind of like rewrote their first album, not rewrote it, but like started over and like, this is our first album. And everybody's albums are just sounding awesome these days.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. That's something that's been surprising to me too. It's like, they're still pushing forward, but still sounding the same as they were when they first started. Like, they are not really breaking the mold of anything, but they're still putting out these records that are just vicious and, compelling to listen to. Whereas, like, I think every band has one or two records in their discography where it's like, well, maybe they didn't try as hard or had some lineup changes on this one that made it sound, less.
Well,
than...
and Dustin, that's the key. Lineup changes.
Yeah.
That it happens. And you know what? Sometimes you have to do with what you have, or you have to make work with, you have to make it work. And like you said, maybe some of the end results weren't the best. But I really feel like I said, in the last several years, I just feel like death metal has come back. It's come back strong.
It really has.
I think, yeah, it really is. And I feel like it's here, and I just feel like everybody's just, everybody, I just think everybody's just inspired again. You know what I mean? You see all these other bands, oh, dude, that's killer, dude. And then you're like, dude, that album blows my mind. And then somehow it influences you to maybe write something to blow somebody else's mind,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a good cohesion
just everybody,
there.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody's doing such a great job, and it's just like, just so many bands, and a lot of bands that were either maybe broke up for a while or slowed down or whatever. Just a lot of bands coming back, and a lot of resurgence, a lot of resurrection, and I don't know. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, that's why I was like excited to get in touch with you, because I was like, well, a lot of times I run into the bands are not really active. I wasn't sure.
Right.
I knew you guys were playing shows and stuff, and you put out a record 2 years ago, but I was like, they really want to talk about a record that's 25 years old. Usually I don't really.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's cool. So I was like, man, all right, this is going to be great, because I'll finally get like that perspective. I love getting that perspective of like, you being in that time that I don't really know of because I was too young, or a lot of my listeners don't really know about because, they either don't know you guys, or they were also too young to really know about death metal in that era, and especially this record. So it's nice to hear about it.
Like I said, I feel like there was some kind of magic about it, because like, I honestly, I mean, I took, I took a couple of, I think I took like a semester or two at our local conservatory to like learn how to play rhythm, and then that was it. I mean, later on in the years, off and on, I took lessons here and there and stuff, and nothing really sank through. And then I went back, I think 2000, and I started doing private lessons with one of my teachers from the conservatory, and kind of made, a couple little breakthroughs, this and that. And then I just kind of realized, like, man, I just want to be a songwriter. And it's like really hard, because if you want to be that shredder and this, you really, really have to commit to it. Yep. And I feel like if I committed to it, I should have done it when I was younger, because I developed way too many bad habits. But I've taken a lot of stride in the last 5 years of my playing. I've doing a lot more research, and I actually rehearse more now than when I was when the band was at its peak back in the day. So I actually rehearse now and have to do way more personal practicing, and like the other night I was down here and I was going over lyrics for all the new songs and making sure everything syncs up, and making sure everything's this and that, and make sure everything works, and you're always doing something. And I think that in today's the society or the era that we're in, you have to work hard. You do. And I know some guy, I just know some guys personally, and they're just like, if it happens. I'm like, well, you got to work for it. You got to work for it. And I said, you got to put in the time. And if you're not going to put in the time, it's either going to show in your playing or it's going to show in your band, and you just have to put in the time. You have to let things happen naturally. You have to let, there's so many different levels to being in a band, and they happen at different points at different times. And you just have to go through it. You just have to let it happen naturally.
Well, I think one last thing I kind of want to touch on here, because I don't want to take too much more of your time,
Yeah, no, you're fine.
From like, let's not ignore it, but let's not talk about like the EP that you did in between the last record. But I think taking off like that, almost 20 years there between 97 and 17, like obviously you were going to grow as a guitar player and a songwriter. So I think it shows on that record, like when you started doing it and writing it and recording it, it was already going to be apparent that you were going to be a better guitar player, and like the songwriting was going to be better. And even having like new members in the band, it was only going to make the end product like better than the previous stuff.
Oh,
and I don't mean that as like a bad thing, but it's good. I totally agree. I totally agree with you, man. I got some really talented guys that I surround myself with. Unfortunately, bad news. Our bass player AJ, that's been with us for like 3.5 years, decided to leave the band to pursue school and some other life things, and so we had to. But you know what? The funny thing about it is if you saw us live, like if we came to your town, 9 out of 10 times you wouldn't have saw him anyways, because he didn't travel very much with us. So we had a fill-in guy from up in my guitar player's area where Scott lives. And he's like, hey, we got John Hill. He's like, hey, man, he'll fill in for us. And so John's actually been with us probably a year and a half or something like that, like filling in off and on. So we offered him the position, and he's going to be the new guy, and he's a very talented guy as well. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. And, it's all about cohesion too, and we get along with him real well. He gets along with us. And I find that really to be refreshing. And I'm not saying AJ didn't get along with us, because he's a great guy and we'll miss him. But, there's just different levels, there's just different levels. And John really likes to be one of the team. And, he just gets along with everybody so well. So, I mean, it definitely helps the flow. It helps music. I don't know if I know I heard he does vocals, so who knows, maybe we'll have him start doing backings, which we've never done before in this band. So it might be something a little maybe different to offer on the next album, maybe add a little bit of dimension or a little difference maybe. Yeah, why not experiment a little bit? I'm always down for that. So
yeah. And go ahead.
So I guess kind of like closing out here, what are maybe some things that you remember we didn't touch on about that record that people should know about or hear about, like funny stories or not funny stories, or just little interesting things about the record?
Well, I do remember our road crew at that time was really in the weed. Okay. So I remember the control room, which we weren't allowed to smoke in there. And for some reason, I remember at one occasion, like they were doing a mix and I walked in and there was just this huge cloud of smoke. Like you could cut it with a knife. It was like, oh my God. And I remember they're like, here, come and smoke this. And I think the joint looked like 3 cigars put together.
Ooh.
It was just huge, man. Yeah. And I just remember that thing wouldn't go out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just wouldn't go out. Like, it kept going and going. So they're like, okay, let's keep smoking this. And I just remember there were quite a few sessions where it was, a weed-induced session. Mm-hmm. So quite a few of those. I do also remember out of that particular time, too, is we were messing around with we had some downtime or something like that, and we had a bunch of tape, because at the time everything was tape, 2-inch tape, real tape. So we had all this tape left, and we're like, hey man, they're like, should we play like Sacrificial Right, which is off our first demo? You want to play that and record it? And we're like, sure. So we played it, recorded it. We're like, cool. And we're like, well, hey, let's do Gory Departure. We did Gory Departure too. So we did 2 songs off the first album. We never released them with the record, which I was kind of disappointed, because that would have been a good bonus track.
Yeah.
But with Sacrificial Right, which did become a 7-inch on Def Records, it became a 7-inch see-through vinyl. I was taking lessons from this guy in town, Steve Peplin, and he's this jazz guy, super fucking good. I don't know why I took lessons from him because I'm not a jazz guy.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, we were just talking to him. I was like, hey man, you want to come in? And I said, hey man, I said, dude, I said, you should lay some solos over, over this Sacrificial Right song, that we did years ago that we re-recorded. He's like, sure. So he comes in the studio, and I remember going like, mind you, this is me, like untrained, unlearned. Guy comes in and he's got his guitar tuned to E, and I'm like, oh dude, don't you need one tuned to D? And he's like, no, I'll just I'll play in a different key. And I'm like, what? I was totally oblivious. I understand now kind of what he did.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he just came in and ripped the solo, just ripped it. And I'm like, dude. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, hold on, let me look. I'm in my record collection. I want to see if that is the case, because I believe the As Humanity Fades that we're talking about, the reissue. Yes, the bonus track is exactly what I'm talking about now, the Sacrificial Right song. That we finally put it on there as a bonus track with the reissue.
Okay.
So with the solos done by this guy, like my other guitar player and I didn't do any of the solos. We let him do them both, and he just ripped them. They're so good.
Damn,
so that's kind
awesome.
of a story.
That's cool, like hearing little studio things like that nobody would ever really know.
Yeah, he did. I know he did a great job, and I remember Eric at the time was like, no, because or not at the time. I remember I was working with Eric and Relapse to put out Through the Eyes of Death, which is going to be a compilation of all our demo songs and stuff, and things we just never released. So I told Eric, I said, dude, I got this rendition of Sacrificial Right. He's like, oh, okay. I remember sending over. He's like, no, I don't like the solos, and I'm like, what? So he didn't put it on that compilation because he said he didn't like the solos. And I'm like, dude, but you know what? It worked out for us because then when we reissued it through Peaceville, now they said let's put it on as a bonus track. So
oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a super cool track. It's recorded in D sharp standard, it's recorded in D standard, and the original version I believe was like drop C or drop C sharp or something like that. So different tunings, but it really sounds good, and it was a really fun recording. The Gordy Departure one, that stuck on one of the DAT tapes, and I just was never really able to retrieve it.
Oh, no.
And I don't even know if we even I don't even know if we recorded it all the way through. I can't remember. I vaguely in back of my memory banks, I kind of remembered something about us like we didn't finish it or something like that. But I don't know. Maybe one of these days I'll find somebody that wants to go through the tape and maybe find it. But yeah, we did like 2 demo songs during that session, and it led us to do the, like I said, the split 7-inch. So I mean, yeah, no, it's definitely cool, man. That guy ripped that solo so bad. I mean, good, but you know what I mean, bad.
Yeah. Man,
he did
David,
a great job. So
this has been awesome, man. I'm glad that you helped me shed some more light on this record, because I feel like it was one of those obscure records that people just kind of forgot about for whatever reason, and it's nice to get a little bit of a story behind it, and hopefully it will get people to rediscover it and, rediscover you guys as a whole, or even find you, for the first time.
Awesome.
I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah,
for
that'd
me.
be awesome. I mean, we always enjoy new fans, and I know like when we've done a couple, we did, California Death Fest and Maryland Death Fest, and people come up to us like, dude, I just stumbled on you like a year ago, or I just got turned on to you, man. And, and I'm like, awesome, dude. It's a really great feeling. Like we had mentioned in our conversation earlier, it's very tough in today's market to constantly be viable and constantly be so there's a couple of bands right now that are tearing up the underground and really doing a great job. Mm-hmm. And but you got to be at it all the time, and you got to tour relentless, and you have to have somebody that's behind you. And that's something that I feel like we've always been at a little bit of a disadvantage. We've never found like somebody that's like, hey, we're going to be your booking agent. We just never have found that person. And we've inquired because we want to be more active, but at the same time, we're grateful for what we do get to do. And, we've been out to the West Coast a couple of times. And then, this is our first year, we'll be in Netherlands and Czech Republic. So,
nice.
It's definitely, it's a blessing, and it's awesome. I thank all the fans, because without them, we wouldn't be doing crap, and that's what it's really about. I mean, even though we're not, to maybe a Cannibal Corpse status or obituary status by any level. I still appreciate the fans that we do have and at the level that we are at. And I think you have to, you have to respect it. You have to respect it, and you have to just kind of do what you got to do. And kind of like what you were saying, step up your writing, step up your playing, do what you got to do to, get what you want.
And I think just kind of to touch on that too, man, I think this is another plus side of technology. It's helping bands kind of find that second life and to get out there and get their music out there again. And I think that's the case for you guys, which is really awesome to see.
Absolutely. Well, and that kind of is why I really kind of went to the label and I was like, hey, let's reissue the back catalog and then let's hit them with a new album. And they were like, wow, let's do that, and the reissues are doing, like I said, Dying Remains is probably on its sixth or seventh pressing now in the past 5 years.
Very nice.
I know As Humanity Fades, they just pressed up the second pressing, I think a couple of weeks ago, so we got our copies. And then the third one as well, that's on a third pressing. And then the new album, I believe they're going to repress that as well. So, I mean, it's awesome. I encourage people to go to Peaceville, or I think their site is The Burning Shed. Order a copy. If they want to order it digitally. But if you want to order a physical copy, go in there, because every time somebody buys a copy, that helps us sell a record, and then that helps us to go forward and be able to do another record.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of fans sometimes, I think, in today's market don't realize either, is that you have to have money. You have to have money to make the record. And could I do it in my bedroom? Probably, but it may not sound as good, like the Serving Two Masters. Story behind that quick. We did a lot of that recording in our basement ourselves, and then went into a studio, mixed it, mastered it, vocals were done in the studio, but everything else was done in the basement. And it sounds good. And I'm very proud of that EP. But I don't think it sounds good as our current album. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it sounds as good as our past albums either. I think it was a test. So I really think, there's definitely a lot of good recording stuff out there that people can do. But, we always want to bring the fans really good recordings, a little bit of a modern sound, but still we want to give them that Morta Skuld stamp. And, go here. This is, we're writing. I mean, we do write music for ourselves, but we write for the fans too.
Yeah.
A lot of times I put myself in positions like, well, what does a fan want to hear? And so I think with this next record, I think they're going to hear some really cool stuff. There's a lot of faster material. And just, kind of went back to a little bit of a Dying Remains-esque type thing in the vocal area. And so we'll see everybody likes it. But like you said, a lot of fans, new, old, whatever, man, just, we appreciate them all. Even if they come to the show and they're like, hey, I want to buy a patch. Can I buy a patch? That's awesome. It still helps us, because the more money we can make selling our merchandise and shirts, quicker we can get in the studio, and then we can stay in the studio, and we can maybe take an extra week instead of only going in for 3 days.
Yeah, live shows and merch is where bands make their money. That's what I always learned from being on tour myself for a little bit. So it's a tough game, man.
That's where it's at, my friend. It is. It's tough.
Well, David, man, if you want to come back on when you're ready to drop some details about that new record, maybe bring on your other guitar player too, or whoever from the band. I would love to talk to you guys about that sometime in the future.
Sure. No, that sounds great. I definitely keep you posted. And when you if you want to send me some links or whatever, mm-hmm. I'm more than happy to share them. If you want to tag me, that's fine too. I'll get this out there so I can help you promote your podcast.
Oh, cool. Thank you, man. Yeah, I'll probably post it on I don't know. I kind of fucked up this week and didn't post anything. So I'm thinking I'm either going to put it up tomorrow, or I'm just going to wait until next Monday when I usually put them up and just get back on my schedule. But either
that's
way,
fine. Whatever you need. Yeah. Whatever you need to do, just let me know. Send me the link, send me what information. I'll help promote you, and we'll tell people hey, go check this out. And I appreciate your time very much. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, man. I appreciate you. Like I said, I'm going to link everything too. So whatever merch stores you guys have or all that, I'll make sure people can find it. So,
awesome.
Thank you for doing this and shed more light on the record, man. It's justice
done.
Thank
you, Dustin. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
All right, man. Well, take care. I will talk to you soon.
All right. You be well.
Bye.
Be excellent to each other. And party on, dudes!